In a galaxy where war never ends, the might of a warrior is measured by the weapons they wield. Nowhere is this more evident than with the Primarchs, demigod generals of the Imperium, each armed with weapons of unimaginable power. From swords that can cleave through reality to hammers that shatter mountains. Today we are diving into the legendary arsenal of the Primarchs. Lionel L. Johnson of the Dark Angels has used many weapons across the ages, his arsenal shifting with the tides of war and treachery. His first recorded weapon was the Wolfblade, an ancient chainsword that was treated very much like Caliban's Sword in the Stone, with no one able to use it due to its weight. Clearly, it had been a lost relic from a time when Caliban had been part of a larger human empire, and when the Lion proved he could use it, his leadership of Caliban's knightly orders was assured. But that changed once the Lord of the First Legion was reunited with his father. The Wolfblade was safely put into the Lion's personal armory, and he was given a new weapon. This was the Lion Sword, a masterwork made by the Emperor's own armorers, its edge capable of igniting anything it struck. Even the war gear of his Gene brothers was not impervious to its fury, as Conrad Kurz's Nightmare Mantle once learned firsthand. He used this weapon for the entire Great Crusade and much of the Horus Heresy, until Gilamin destroyed it. Gilamin took offense to the Lion's brutal suppression of a rebellion on the ultramarine homeworld of Macrogge and snapped the blade over his knee as punishment. Without his amazing power sword, L. Johnson returned to a familiar old relic, the Wolfblade, which he used for the remainder of the heresy. But that is not the end of the story, because when the Lion returned after 10 millennia in the Abyss, he did so with a new weapon. Now he is armed with Fealty, a towering power sword forged as a testament to his unwavering devotion to the Emperor. But even more legendary is the relic upon his arm, the Emperor's own personal shield, an artifact capable of withstanding and even banishing the might of the demon Primarchs, which Angron learned the hard way. Before his gradual slide into heresy, Fulgrim shared a very close relationship with his brother Ferrus Manus of the Iron Hands, and the two exchanged weapons that they forged for each other. Fulgrim made his brother a warhammer named Forgebreaker, while Ferrus gifted his perfect brother an elegant power sword named Fireblade. This weapon, capable of generating immense heat, remained Fulgrim's chosen weapon for most of the Great Crusade. Alongside it, he wielded Firebrand, a Volkite charger pistol. Fireblade was the perfect weapon for a duelist like Fulgrim. Light, well-balanced, although perhaps not as powerful as something like the hammer he had made for his brother. Meanwhile, Firebrand suffered from a Volkite weapon's usual lack of range, but its beam configuration allowed for the sort of movement in combat that Fulgrim was known for. Here we see already that Fulgrim chose his weapons to showcase his ability rather than as efficient tools of war. But despite this, they would serve him well, until he found something more seductive. During the cleansing of Laren, Fulgrim claimed a strange silver sword from the alien ruins. He set aside Fireblade in favor of this newfound weapon, not realizing that it housed a powerful demon of Slaanesh. Slowly, the demon began to whisper to the Primarch, seizing on his insecurities and driving him to greater displays of superiority and arrogance. But of course, even a demonic sword wouldn't be enough for the Phoenician, and he actually ended up swapping weapons with Ferrus when the two battled in the Iron Hands Forge, after Fulgrim failed to recruit him to the traitor cause. Ferrus disarmed Fulgrim, taking the Fireblade and breaking it with his bare metal hands, while Fulgrim took Forgebreaker and used it to knock out his brother and flee. The next time they would see each other, each brother would be wielding the weapons they had made for each other, with Ferrus having reforged Fireblade. During the tragic duel, Ferrus managed to disarm his brother again, and Fulgrim was forced to use the Lairblade against his brother, slaying him even as Fireblade was raised in defiance. As a demon Primarch, Fulgrim has since abandoned mortal weapons, instead manifesting the blades of the Phoenician, exquisite demonic weapons capable of slicing through entire squads of elite warriors and war machines alike. And as if one fratricide weren't enough, Fulgrim would later use a poisoned blade to mortally wound Roboute Gilamin at the end of the Scouring, nearly robbing the Imperium of its last great hope. As the Primarch of the Iron Warriors, Perturabo was a living engine of war, his every tactic a calculated equation of destruction. True to his nature, the Lord of the Fourth Legion went to battle encased in the Logos, a masterwork suit of Terminator armor of his own design. Based on the Cataphractii pattern, the Logos transformed Perturabo into an unyielding war machine, blending immense durability with advanced command and control systems that allowed him to orchestrate his legion's sieges with cold precision. One of its most formidable features was the Logos Array. This system housed a teleport homer for rapid redeployment and a pair of wrist-mounted shrapnel bolters capable of unleashing thousands of rounds per second, tearing through enemy ranks with ruthless efficiency. It seems that any other melee weapons Perturabo used during the Great Crusade are not mentioned and were likely weapons of convenience until he was gifted the Warhammer Forgebreaker, originally forged by Fulgrim for Ferrus Manus, a cruel twist of fate, or perhaps a calculated insult, as the hammer built in Brotherhood was now wielded in treachery. Jagatai wielded the White Tiger Dao, a master-crafted power sword styled after the weapons of his homeland. At his side was the Storm's Voice, an ancient pistol gifted to him by the Emperor himself, a relic capable of unleashing devastating arcs of lightning against his foes. But of all his war gear, nothing was more iconic than the Sojutsu pattern Void Bike, a prototype jet bike so massive and powerful that it was officially classified as an ultra-light fighter craft. While the Sojutsu predated the scimitar pattern jet bikes favored by his legion, it outperformed them, granting the Khan speed unmatched by any mortal rider. Capable of limited atmospheric flight and fully functional in the void, the Sojutsu was more than just a means of transport. It was a weapon in its own right, and its weapon systems, speed, and capabilities allowed the Khan to do what he did best: hunt the enemies of humanity. Leman Russ wielded two savage melee weapons, the Frost Axe Hellwinter and Mjolnir, a massive frostblade known also as the Sword of Bale Knight. Both were cut from the teeth of the legendary Kraken. But among his weapons, one stood apart: the Dionician Spear, also called the Spear of Russ, and Gungnir. The Space Wolves lived to give things a lot of names, we don't know what to tell you. The spear was a weapon forged by the Emperor and a gift to Russ. A weapon of strange and unknowable power, it was said to illuminate those it pierced, burning away deception and revealing the truth beneath. The spear possessed a will of its own, always returning to Russ, even though he tried to intentionally lose the weapon more than once. He hated the spear for some time, rejecting its presence in favor of more familiar war gear, until a vision compelled him to drive the spear into his own flesh. Only then did he come to understand its significance and his own role in the fate of the Imperium. When Russ clashed with Horus, he drove the spear into the War Master's corrupted flesh, and for a brief moment, the taint of chaos left him. But Russ hesitated, unsure of his destiny, just long enough for Horus to recover. It was a fleeting chance lost to the tides of fate, and the heresy would march on towards its inevitable tragic conclusion. But that's actually not the end of this spear. In the same way that the weapon would often mysteriously find its way back to Russ, his Gungnir would return to the Sons of the Wolf Lord on several occasions, helping them to fend off enemies like Magnus the Red and keeping the Space Wolves safe. True to his legion's legendary marksmanship, Dorn was armed with the Voice of Terra, a bolter crafted in the style of the Custodes' own Guardian weapons, but reforged on a larger scale to suit his gigantic hands. Yet for all his skill with ranged firepower, Dorn was at his most effective when using Storm's Teeth, a brutal chainsword forged by the greatest smiths of his homeworld, Inuit, before the Emperor's arrival. With its monstrous teeth, the weapon could tear through flesh, stone, and even ceramite with terrifying ease. Though Dorn was briefly associated with other weapons, such as the Soul Spear, later gifted to the Soul Drinkers chapter, it was Storm's Teeth that remained his preferred instrument of war. It was with this blade that he struck down Alpharius in the desperate fight on Pluto, and when the Siege of Terra reached its climax, it was with Storm's Teeth in hand that he faced Fulgrim in single combat, carving through the masterworked armor of the Demon Primarch. It should be a mark of how loyal Dorn was to his adopted family on Inuit that, unlike many of his brothers, he never favored a weapon given by the Emperor or anyone else over his adopted family's chainblade. Kurz held little love for the standard weaponry of the Imperium. In place of a bolt pistol, he wielded the Widowmakers, razor-edged throwing blades designed to maim more than to kill. Yet no weapon defined him more than his infamous lightning claws, mercy and forgiveness. These vicious talons were as much symbols of his identity as they were instruments of slaughter, carving his legend into the annals of history. Like much of the Nighthaunters' war gear, his talons were confiscated by Imperial forces, driving his legion to forge duplicates, imitations that Kurz wielded without hesitation until the bitter end. The Angel of Baal went to war with a trinity of relics, each bound to his lineage by blood and destiny. The blade in Carmine, a massive power sword, was the symbol of his martial supremacy, while the Spear of Telesto was a truly legendary artifact, its very essence linked to the genetic heritage of Sanguinius and his sons. The spear possessed a unique ability. It could unleash a blast of energy that would obliterate any unworthy soul who lacked the blood of the angel in their veins. A very useful weapon if you're trying to avoid killing your own soldiers in a packed fight. This sacred relic was lost at some point in its history, only to be unearthed by the fallen Archeo, a renegade who believed himself to be the second coming of Sanguinius. He would use the Spear of Telesto against his own brothers during the Blood Angels' civil war, before it was ultimately reclaimed. Lastly, Sanguinius carried the Moonsilver Blade, a weapon that was rarely drawn yet invaluable when facing the unnatural horrors of the warp. Forged from the same sacred alloy as the Imperial Fist's mighty phalanx Star Fort, the Moonsilver Blade was a gift from Rogel Dorn himself, a token of the strong bond between the two Primarchs. Against demons, its edge was said to burn with a cold celestial fire, a weapon of purity for the Emperor's most angelic son. Of all Primarchs, Ferrus Manus was perhaps the greatest smith, his mastery rivaled only by his brother Fulgrim and Vulcan. But more than any of the Primarchs, Ferrus was a walking arsenal, a weapon from head to toe. And that starts with his hands. The living metal that encased his forearms was a gift, or a curse, given to him after a battle with a monstrous construct that met its end being held under molten rock by a young Manus until it melted away. The act forever marked Ferrus with the gleaming metal limbs that would give him his name. And like we said, that was just the start. Like with Perturabo, Ferrus made his own armor, the Medusan Carapace, into yet another weapon. His constant fine-tuning of this armor ended up contributing to the design of the Cataphracti Terminator suits. Of course, he saved the best upgrades for himself. The most infamous was the suit's integrated arsenal, a staggering array of servo arms bristling with destructive potential, such as rapid-fire grenade launchers and cannons that could tear enemies apart by warping gravity itself. Despite this, his most iconic weapon was not one of his own making. Instead, it was gifted to him by Fulgrim following a contest to determine which of them was the superior craftsman. That weapon was Forgebreaker, a thunderhammer of staggering power, a masterwork unlike any other. Ferrus Manus wielded it throughout the Great Crusade, a testament to his brotherhood with Fulgrim, until that same brother used it in their duel at Eastvan 5. If any Primarch could fill a museum with the weapons he has wielded, it would be Angron. By Nucarian tradition, a warrior binds their weapons to their forearms, never using them again should they break or fall to the ground. Yet among the countless tools of carnage he has used, two remain legendary: Gorefather and Gorechild, a pair of vicious chain axes whose teeth were taken from a Mica dragon and could cleave through armor like air. They were damaged when Angron used them to cut out of a fallen building, and while Gorefather lay abandoned, Gorechild was recovered by Karn the Betrayer, who still uses it to this day. Angron has since taken up many other weapons, even in his ascension to demonhood. The Demon Primarch now wields a massive chain axe known as Spine Grinder, a gift given by Dark Mechanicum priests of Perjax, repaid by a swift and bloody death at Angron's hands for the crime of not shedding blood in the name of Khorne. His second weapon, Samnarius, has an even darker story. It was once a Slaneshi demon, a self-proclaimed gladiatorial master who loved to boast of its skill. Enraged by the claim, Angron answered with the only language he knew, violence. With a massive iron bar, he bludgeoned the demon into submission, and in its final moments, he bound it to that crude weapon, creating a twisted blade of unparalleled brutality. Among all the Primarchs, Rabute Gilamin has what is probably the most unique armory. During the Great Crusade and the Horus Heresy, he carried many weapons, but none were as long-lasting as the Hand of Dominion, a masterwork power fist that remains his favored tool of war even after his resurrection. Unlike a standard power fist, the Hand of Dominion boasts an underslung bolter, making this symbol of authority a very clear precursor to the Gauntlets of Ultramar, which would be used by future chapter masters of the Ultramarines. He also used to hold the Gladius Incandor, a blade lost during his infamous duel with Fulgrim. Once resurrected, he needed a replacement, and Gilamin was granted the Emperor's own sword, a weapon of such divine potency that it could annihilate armies and, more crucially, was among the few instruments capable of permanently destroying demons. Its flames are not a physical trait like Fulgrim's Fireblade, they are a manifestation of the Emperor's own psychic might. Though Gilamin himself lacks the strength to fuel it, the fire still burns, powered by the undying will of the Master of Mankind. The most iconic of all Mortarion's weapons is Silence, the towering two-handed war scythe that has become a symbol of plague and despair. Inside its hilt is a bound demon, its putrid essence turning every sweep of the blade into a new vector for infection, as the very air Silence cleaves through spreads diseases capable of rotting lungs and blackening flesh. His sidearm, the energy pistol known as Lantern, has an origin as unusual as its wielder. Once the weapon of a slain cult leader, it was claimed by the Emperor himself from the field of battle. When Mortarion joined the Crusade, his father offered him a beautiful power sword, but Mortarion, ever defiant, rejected the sword and instead chose Lantern from the Imperial vaults. A powerful energy weapon, Mortarion often chose to use it to disintegrate his enemies when he deemed them unworthy of his giant scythe. And that has not changed much in the 42nd millennium, a potent and blinding message to the foes of the Death Lord. Among the warlords of the Great Crusade, none wielded power like Magnus the Red. While his brothers fought with blade and bolter, Magnus fought with the warp itself. Only the Emperor surpassed him in psychic might, and so even though his mind was his greatest weapon, he still used more mundane weaponry. For most of his time in the Great Crusade, Magnus wielded the Blade of An Nanurata. The weapon was forged in honor of a myth from Prospero, his doomed homeworld. It was a relic of his loyalist days, a symbol of his station, but when his fate was bound to the ruinous powers, the weapon was remade, now known as the Blade of Magnus. It is a demon-forged thing, a blade that shifts and reshapes itself in response to whatever Magnus wants at the time. Every Primarch is a living weapon, but Magnus took that idea much further, focusing on his abilities rather than what he could hold in his hands, which makes discussion of his weaponry easier, if nothing else. Horus Lupercal preferred to use weapons that showcased his raw power, like Worldbreaker, a thunderous power maul capable of destroying even Night Titans with a single blow. Forged by the Emperor's own hand and given to Horus when he was named War Master, it was a weapon fit for the greatest general of the Imperium. But when Horus fell, so did Worldbreaker. Shattered when the Emperor killed him on his ship, its fragments reforged into lesser relics scattered across the galaxy. Yet one weapon of his name has managed to survive, the Talon of Horus. A relic of the dark age of technology, this monstrous lightning claw included an integrated combi bolter. It was this talon that Horus used to end Sanguinius, his most beloved brother, and wounded the Emperor himself in their titanic duel aboard the Vengeful Spirit. When Horus's body was reclaimed by his men, the talon was given to Abaddon the Despoiler, who has made gruesome use of it ever since. It was the same weapon that slew Sigismund, the first Emperor's champion, and spilled the blood of 1,000 other warlords and heroes. A weapon of betrayal and legend, the Talon of Horus remains a black mark upon history, a reminder of the War Master's fall and the nightmare that followed. As both a weapon and a symbol of office, the Primarch of the Wordbearers carried the ornate Illuminarum, a power maul forged by Ferrus Manus, who seems to have outfitted almost all of his brothers at one point or another. The hammer had been gifted to Lorgar as a symbol of cooperation, which makes its eventual use in destroying some of the Imperium's greatest champions a bit rude, if nothing else. While Lorgar saw the weapon as a symbol rather than an instrument of destruction, those who found themselves on its receiving end would likely disagree. His secondary weapon, an ancient pistol known as Devotion, was more cruel than most Drakari weapons, which is saying something. Capable of unleashing a gravitic field upon its target, it didn't just kill, it crushed foes beneath their own weight. An execution style that weirdly worked well with the weapon's name, considering how both the Imperium and the Forces of Chaos would make use of religion in the millennia to follow. The great smith of Nocturne, Vulcan, was nearly unmatched in the art of the forge, crafting weapons and artifacts of unrivaled power. As the Primarch of the Salamanders, he had access to countless masterworks throughout his lifetime, many of which he personally destroyed to prevent them from falling into the wrong hands, yet a chosen few were spared at the request of Tekel, the first Forge Father of the Salamanders. Vulcan made frequent use of the Furnace's Heart, an energy blade forged by his brother Ferrus Manus. That man really couldn't stop himself from giving out weapons. Though not one of his artifacts, Vulcan wielded the sword as a tribute to his brother. He also had the Gauntlet of the Forge, an immense power gauntlet housing a heavy flamer capable of reducing foes to molten slag with a single burst. The gauntlet was worked into his armor, so he was never caught without at least one weapon. But Vulcan's most iconic instrument of war was the Warhammer Dawnbringer, which was able to strike with apocalyptic force. Originally designed as a teleportation device, it was also, as previously mentioned, a powerful warhammer, a fact that Conrad Kurz somehow overlooked while he held Vulcan prisoner. The Salamander reminded his brother of the fact very painfully before using it to escape. Today, the Salamanders revere the weapons saved by Tekel as the 9 artifacts of Vulcan. These relics serve as more than just war gear, they are sacred relics held in the hope that one day they will guide the chapter to their lost Primarch. Corvus Corax was the Emperor's foremost master of swift execution strikes and guerrilla warfare. His arsenal was collectively known as the Panoply of the Raven Lord, a suite of deadly weapons befitting the Emperor's stealthiest boy. Among them was an energized whip, a creation of the Mechanicum's finest artisans, and a pair of ancient pistols, Wrath and Justice, whose precise high-impact shots could tear through ceramite armor like paper. But most fearsome of all were the Raven's talons, his signature lightning claws, whose monomolecular edges could slice through the strongest armor. Legends claim that their blades were unbreakable. In the wake of the heresy, Cororax underwent a transformation very similar to some of his traitorous brothers. Consumed by vengeance, he vanished into the warp, emerging as something far more terrifying than the warrior he had once been. No longer bound by the rules of the material universe, the Primarch became a living nightmare, a demonic raven creature whose form was a writhing mass of talons and beaks, a whirling shadow of death. Stripped of the need for weapons or armor, he now hunts his traitor kin within the depths of the warp, appearing from nothingness to rip apart entire squads of heretic Astartes before vanishing once more. He has become the darkness that traitors fear, a dark knight. Sorry, we couldn't resist. The enigmatic twins of the Alpha Legion, if indeed there were 2 of them, remain the most elusive of the Emperor's sons. Whether Alpharius and Omegon were truly separate beings or facets of a grand deception remains one of the Imperium's greatest mysteries. The secrecy extended to their war gear, making it nearly impossible to pinpoint which weapons or armor definitively belonged to them. Their entire legion operated as an extension of their deception, with its warriors often claiming to be Alpharius themselves, rendering any first-hand accounts unreliable. Confusing matters even more, the twins, along with many of their officers, were known to use the Hydra's Spite, a rare plasma weapon that defied the common failings of normal Imperial plasma weapons, never overheating or misfiring like its simpler counterparts. One weapon, however, is recorded with certainty: the Pale Spear. This strange and possibly Xenos-forged weapon was as much an enigma as the Primarchs themselves, capable of splitting into multiple segments and phasing in and out of existence. Anyone struck by it would be left with bloodless wounds surrounded by strange smokeless vapors, their bodies dissolving as though erased from reality itself. It was this spear that Alpharius carried to his final battle against Rogel Dorn, before being very messily dispatched by the Praetorian's blade Storm's Teeth. Or at least, that's the story, but with the Alpha Legion, the truth is never so simple. Each Primarch's war gear wasn't just a tool, it was a symbol of who they were, a legacy forged in battle. Some of these relics were lost to time. Others still see use, and a few continue to shape the fate of the galaxy. But which of these legendary weapons or armor pieces do you think best represents its Primarch? Let us know in the comments. We have already covered the identity and incredible feats of the Sons of the Emperor in an earlier video, so if you hunger for more tales of war, betrayal, and legend, make sure you're ready. Subscribe, drop a like, and ring the bell so that you can always find yourself armed and armored with more lore.